Good day and welcome to MAXforum from the Neuroverse, Part 2, Costs of Extraction, with artists Stephanie Dinkins and Kyle McDonald, who will explore how artists can use science and technology and the more than human to light the path forward. We presented Stephanie's Secret Garden at our Neuroverse Festival. This premiered at Sundance 2021, and we augmented it to VR for a spectacular presentation at Onyx Studios. This piece will be presented by partners around the country, and her work is included in the Futures Festival at the Smithsonian Institute through the midsummer of 2022. And we are delighted to say that Siren, Listening to Another Species on Earth, where Kyle was part of the artistic team and which we presented at the Neuroverse Festival. It was originally a commission of our Max Machina incubator, and it appears at Mass MoCA in January 2022. Both of these artists are masters at remaining true to their artistic conception and their artistic impulse while using the most advanced technology. We know that it's not always easy to stay truthful in the face of technology. We've learned that as a society. So it is very valuable to hear from these two masters. And to guide this conversation is Max thought partner Adora Udoji, whom we are delighted is able to join us here just prior to taking on her new role as the Vice President of Programming and Operations at PBS. She is a master guide of storytelling, and we look forward to seeing her influence at PBS and to continuing to have conversations with her. And with that, I hand it over to Adora. I want to acknowledge that we post this from the unceded territories and waters of the Lenape people. And Adora, thank you for being here, and it's all yours.
Thank you, Kay, and a huge congratulations to Kay and her entire team at Max Live, the Neuroverse Festival, an extraordinary event. And I'm so pleased, I couldn't be more pleased to be here speaking with Kyle McDonald and Stephanie Dinkins. Welcome, both of you. I think it would be a great place to start if each of you would provide some context for us and tell us a little bit about your pieces of work. Stephanie, if you'd like to start and tell us about Secret Garden.
Sure, Dora, thank you. And thank you, Kay. It's great to be with you both. Secret Garden is this project that's taken like 3 or 4 years to get together. It started as a kernel with Bell Labs. I was a resident artist at Nokia Bell Labs, and we grew it, thinking about the power of stories. I think of them as shared and withheld, right? And really, Secret Garden is this installation in one sense. It's a web XR piece in another that anyone can access. And now it's a VR piece that tries to illuminate women's stories, and particularly Black women's stories, right? I'm trying to tell a multi-generational story that collapses past, present, and future, and maybe future futures, right? And it's really a space of exploration, a garden that you roll through, and maybe you start to hear stories and find women. And, you know, those things are detached, and they're very intentionally detached, because I feel like the stories are all of our stories. So from the story of a slave girl coming across on a ship to the story of this future person, you know, talking about their successes, and everyone in between, it's all connected. And I'm hoping that if we, those whose stories they are, can recognize them, we stand on them, we're stronger. And if you, those who experience the piece, can hear them, like really hear them, take the time to listen and experience, and maybe even embody, then we start to understand each other a little bit better. And, you know, I'm really a proponent that all our futures have to be bright for any of our futures to be bright and strong. And so hopefully listening is a thing that we learn to do slightly through this piece, and we learn a little bit more about each other through the piece. Thanks.
Listening is a perfect word of transition, but just so the audience is clear, we're talking about 3 distinct formats. Secret Garden is both a physical installation, it is a web experience, and in addition, and thirdly, sort of the third window, if you like, is virtual reality. Because we're going to get back to that, and I think that's an important part both for Stephanie and for Kyle. And she referred to this concept of listening, and clearly, Kyle, that is a perfect segue to Siren. Please tell us about it.
Yeah, gladly. Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me here. Siren is a collaboration with Annie Lewandowski and scenic designer Amy Rubin, where we are trying to illuminate the world of humpback whales and the sort of underwater world of sea mammals, and some of the things that they're dealing with these days. It's the 50th anniversary of the record Songs of the Humpback Whales, which was created by Roger Payne and Katie Payne. And Annie, a few years ago, went out and recorded some humpback whale songs with Katie, and composed a 40-minute composition, which is installed in this space, Invisible Dog, here in Brooklyn, as part of this festival. And I helped with some lighting design using machine learning. So we were interested in how we can get a little bit closer to understanding the humpbacks as a kind of creative intelligence, but also as a kind of ambassador for this underwater world. The humpbacks have, since Songs of the Humpback Whales record 50 years ago, humpback populations have returned to near pre-whaling levels after being almost extinct. Not every whale has managed to have the same sort of positive direction in their population numbers, but humpbacks are one of the big, like they're the inspiring creatures in the water that we're all listening to and watching. So we were trying to figure out if there's a way to illuminate their inner life, as well as their environment. And so the installation features a bunch of derelict fishing gear that was recovered from Cape Cod, which is one of the main challenges for whales in the New England area. About something like 70 to 80% of whales in this area show signs of scarring and entanglement. And it's one of the main challenges for North Atlantic right whales, of which there are only maybe 300 left. So now that they're at the edge of extinction, we felt like this was a good moment to kind of listen in a little more closely to what's happening in the ocean, and to maybe find some kinship with these creative creatures and our kind of distant relatives.
So talk a little bit about the layers, the textured layers. I mean, you have fabrication, you have sound, you have machine learning. I mean, just as I sort of laid out how Secret Garden is accessible in these three variety of ways, could you just tell us a little bit about that marriage between the variety of types of art that you integrated into this experience?
Yeah, gladly. So, there's the act of actually digging up fishing gear from Cape Cod. That's part of the project. There's active recording, with audio, these hydrophones in Hawaii, which is where one of the kind of biggest humpback populations go during the breeding season. You see in the space the fishing gear, you hear the recordings. The machine learning is the byproduct of the songs kind of going through this analysis process, which is a mixture of manual annotations from Annie and some automatic classification and understanding that I've been working on with an algorithm called UMAP. And that all gets kind of mapped into this physical space, which is a kind of light and sound installation on top of these nets. There's also a mobile element that we're still developing, which is synchronized with the piece. And you can see a bit more of like a didactic explanation of what's going on. It's more of a straightforward kind of data visualization, as opposed to the space itself, which is a little bit more abstract. It's more suggestive, and it's not such a direct mapping between like, here's what you're hearing and now here's some data that corresponds to that. It's a little bit more of a gestural thing. It's like tasting notes for listening. The closer that you can watch, then the more that you can pick up with your ears.
I saw Stephanie smile. Do you want to jump in there? And this is a conversation, so I would encourage either one of you to jump in at any point. Why are you smiling, Ms. Dinkins?
I love that concept of tasting notes for the process, right? It just feels like this nice guided thing, which is kind of interesting as we were talking about my idea of not wanting to guide people through things. So that I'm excited about the tasting notes is an interesting tidbit to me.
Yeah, I think there's always that stress between wanting people to get something specific out of the work and sort of wanting them to discover it on their own without you telling them what to do. You want to sort of lead them along, or I would like to lead people along through a journey without sort of telling them where they're going to go or where they're going to end up. And yeah, it's really easy to like write a scientific paper or give them a straightforward data visualization. It's a lot harder to let people kind of have their own journey. And I think that's kind of the role of an artist a lot of the time.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I'm so interested in creating experiences, and I always want people to leave with a bee in their bonnet, right? Around something I've presented so that they're walking around and really dissecting and digesting that information on their own and wrestling with it and doing the work to kind of put it into their bodies. It's funny when I think of a piece, if it's successful, you know, somebody 2 or 3 weeks from now or even a month, sorry, my cat wants to be part of this conversation as well, will come up to me and say, hey, I'm still thinking about that piece, right? I wasn't quite sure, but it's still with me. And that's where I always want to be.
We're going to really dig in a little bit, or as much as we can, in this conversation about creative practice. But can we just roll it back for one second? Machine learning, 3D technology, volumetric. I have to confess that I produced Stephanie's the first installation and the 3D experience, so I'm intimately familiar with Secret Garden and some of the technology that we used. But you're talking about various types of sound, Kyle, as well as like shovels, right, to dig up the fish. So it's all these various components that make up these elements. Each of you talk to us about how you think about the use of these pieces of technology in the creative process. What comes first? Is it, oh, I love this technology, I want to find a way to use it? Or I have this vision of Siren and whales, or I have this vision of this asynchronous narrative that involves 6th generation of African American women. How do each of you think about that when you're in the midst of your ideation and creative vision process?
Wow. Yeah, Kyle, can I always think about the story or whatever it is I'm interested in conveying first. And I may have absolutely no idea how I'm going to convey it or how it's going to get done or what's really entailed in it. For me, it's kind of a step into adventure to figure out how you get those things done. So for me, it's always about, well, how do I think about the things I'm really interested in? How do I then communicate those things to others? But then how do I bring in all the folks that are necessary to bring it? And for me, that's a lot because I'm truly a photographer by training. And so I can dabble in some coding, but I'm not deep. And that means getting developers. With Secret Garden, it meant, oh my gosh, you know, months of talking to people about that and then casting and then shooting in very specific studios so we could get that volumetric and then trying to put it together in some way. So it's a big process. But for me, I'm super interested in the instance, that spark of idea, and then figuring out how that works. And for the machine learning, it's like, well, what's really to serve the piece? Because I don't know that I necessarily need all the bells and whistles, but if it serves and works for the piece, then okay, we'll do it, right?
I think for our project, that process looked like, you know, initially Annie having this relationship essentially to these 3 humpback singers. You know, she went out to Hawaii with Katie, made these recordings, and had a very kind of profound experience, a direct experience with these creatures. And on my side, I had a kind of deep sort of intellectual and artistic practice that was connecting machine learning to different kinds of sonic worlds and interactive spaces. And we both had a feeling like there was something at the intersection here. And we just spent a year basically during the whole pandemic talking to each other, meeting regularly, trying to figure out what is this thing? What is this thing at the intersection? I would do different experiments with code, and we'd review them together, and we'd spend a lot of time talking about what we were learning. We'd just spend a lot of time listening to, you know, hours of recordings. And we both have a musical background. Annie is a composer and performer, and just trying to kind of like follow our ears and follow our hearts, and slowly over time started to notice that we were facing a kind of we'd come to a gate. We'd realized either we needed to take a very extractive approach here and say we're going to take these songs out of the ocean and sort of put them on display with all of these accoutrements to, you know, demonstrate how complex they are, or we need to actually get into the world of these creatures and recognize them as our relatives and ancestors and as other beings on this planet with us. And if we want to do that, then we can't take an extractive approach. That has to be something that recognizes our connections and relationships to them. That really put a lot more weight on our shoulders to realize that we had to not just make some pretty visualization of these cool songs, but we had to do something that actually served the humpbacks in some ways as a kind of, not quite collaborator, but in a way that gave us the opportunity to be sort of cautious advocates for them, and to try and do something that can't quite be consentful, but it can be consequential. We can have some accountability for what we're doing. And yeah, I think that was the process. It was really, it's a long conversation, lots of experiments, and just trying to be honest with ourselves and with the different collaborators involved.
That's an interesting word, accountability, because I think I know plenty of artists who don't feel accountable, right? They are expressing their sense of a vision, whatever those tools might be. Let's talk about technology, and Kate talked about this in the beginning, relative to being able to create these sight, hearing, motion. I mean, for Secret Garden, part of our installation was about how people moved in the space, and that having a direct impact on the experience that they had. Do you feel sometimes, either one of you, like there's too much technology, too many choices? Do you think that, do you ever find yourself wanting to use something because it seems cool, and then you justify why you use it? Or how is that interplay when you are working through that process of how you're thinking about that technology, or any technology?
Go for it, Kyle.
I feel like
That's
I
what
was,
doing.
yeah, I feel like I was really attracted to coolness when I was, you know, a little more immature, when I was, or let's say when I was getting started. And I don't know that there's something necessarily bad about that. There's a superficiality to it. Coolness is temporary. It only lasts so long. New tech comes and goes. I think what has been drawing me in a lot more recently is thinking about technology that serves people and serves communities in a way that matters. And a lot of the stuff that is cool is not really designed to serve anybody. It's designed to be impressive.
That's so true.
You know, I've been working with some indigenous Polynesian folks in the East Solomon Islands, and it's been really interesting to see how they make decisions as a group to decide, you know, do we want internet on our island? Like, we don't have any connection to the outside world, so should we get this? And, you know, some folks have spent a lot of time off island and they have an experience of what that means, but they want to make a decision as a group that serves them with this new technology. And they've developed a lot of other technologies over the years, like their, you know, large vaca, these boats that they have used for navigating and settling all of the Pacific. Like, those tools and technologies served them as a community and gave them the chance to connect more deeply with each other. And I'm sure there was also some element of it being cool at the time, like you could go fast, right? But eventually, yeah, it became a part of their society because it served some deeper role. And I would hope to find, I don't know, I'm looking for those technologies, the things that connect us more closely now, instead of just feeling cool. Some, you know, coolness, again, it's not inherently bad, but it can be superficial.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm with you, Kyle. So I always have that battle with cool, right? Because I feel like a lot of technological art is really, as Kyle says, cool and impressive, and it's like bells and whistles. But then when you start to try to break it down and think about what it's doing or why it's doing it, it's so hard to come to like some firm grounding. And so for me, the practice is much more about, well, does this technology really support the thought that I'm trying to deal with, or the questions? Or, I'm often just questioning the technology and how it serves society or not, and whether and how it can do it better. And so there's some combination of wanting to use technology to enhance experience and wanting to use or call out technology for what it's doing because it has a really far reach, right? Once you get outside of who we are as artists making with these technologies and you start thinking about the implications of the technology and then how available they are to us as artists, which means how available they are to folks across the board to do many things with, then the question for me becomes, well, what are we doing with this and how are we crafting our worlds with it? And if we're using it and it's starting to craft our worlds, what is our responsibility to it? What is its responsibility to us? And how do we have to care for it so that, if we're thinking in the human realm alone, like that it cares for us better? That's all I can really think about these days is like, how does the technology care for us better? Because
Mm.
it's kind of crazy. It's exciting what's possible. It's scary what's possible. How do we make what's possible better? How do we make it available to more communities so that they can really take advantage of it in addition to all the technologies that they've used for time immemorial, right? Like, how do we really make the technology work for us as a society is what I'm really thinking about a lot. And so cool, okay, if something happens to be cool, right on, but it doesn't have to be, and sometimes it is just boring, and that's
Yeah,
okay.
I
And it's
feel
sort of
like
like, I mean, what I'm hearing from both of you also is this idea of the artist, the humanist, the technologist. And how do those three concepts, meet? I mean, Kyle, you used the word accountability. That's an interesting word. I think we could spend a lot of time just talking about that. And um, how each of those interact with each other in the context of that creative process. Has that changed for each of you? Kyle, you said when you were younger, you thought cool tech was,
that
cool
was it.
tech. And
Yeah.
Stephanie, as you said, it's coming fast and furiously all the time. And we could spend all of our time just learning about new tech and never on our art, right? Because these things take time. So talk a little bit about how you've come to reconcile those three pillars, or maybe you haven't. Art, humanist, technologist. And would you claim all three of those titles?
It's really funny. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know that I claim any of those titles, right? Um, it's a really interesting place to be because I feel like, okay, most of all, art and artists. Okay, I claim artist. I will claim that one. Full throttle. It gives me a platform that I can go in many different directions. I love that freedom that it gives me. Humanist, I keep looking up, like I've been looking up and reviewing the idea of like what is a humanist, right? And how does that function, and placing humans at center, right? Or maybe humans and the natural world at center. And I'm thinking about humans, the natural world, and a technological sphere that all need to be considered in very different ways because of the ways that we're impacting each other. So that becomes a really big one for me as well, because I'm like, I don't know where I stand. I know that I'm concerned for us learning to deal, live, and collaborate across all those lines, but I'm not sure where I sit in it. And then for technologists, I'm just like, okay, I play and craft in technology, but I still cannot take that title at all. But
I know
I
you
am
and
very,
but we're not even going to replay, you and I have had
yeah,
many debates
exactly.
about this because I consider you a creative technologist, an artist and a creative technologist, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I believe that people, you don't have to have a computer science degree to be considered a technologist. That hasn't been my experience. It has to be someone who is engaged and learning tactically how some of this works. And you're definitely in that. Right. And you
Yeah.
can manipulate files and you could do all of these variety of things because you're doing it in service of your art. but you are pretty nimble,
I'm
technically.
pretty nimble.
Yes.
Pretty nimble, not
Makes
super
sense.
nimble, right? I'll take the tactical part for sure. But it's really interesting just because, I always find it myself at a point where I'm like, oh no, I've hit a wall of my capabilities, which is pretty early. Now what do I do? And what does that mean I have to do to get the work done? Which is like, oh, call somebody like Kyle, right? Or something like that becomes the thing. It's like, how does that work?
But it's
But
also
yeah,
collaborative, right, Kyle? I mean, at the end of the day, how many people were involved in this installation that you've created? This was not a 2 or 1 person project.
Right.
So talk about that, because you are the technologist, but talk about what that means in the confines of working with all types of subject matter experts as well as artists, right? I mean, talk about the types of people that it took to bring Siren to life.
Totally. So I already mentioned myself, Annie Lewandowski, Amy Rubin, working on the lighting design, the sound composition and sort of general artistic direction, and then working on the scenic design. Those are just the people that showed up on site. But you've also got, a crew of people who are working on the production and coordination. You've got people who were helping with, literally pulling fishing net out of Cape Cod. It's not just this place, but other places we've shown this, and it sort of something gets added every time we show it in a new site. You've got Katie Payne, you've got all of the other folks that they went out on the boat with in Hawaii, who were marine mammal scientists, and some folks who were just along for the ride. All of that comes together into sort of community effort. It's not really just about, it's definitely not about the technology. I'm there as an artistic voice and as a kind of technical guide, and I get to implement a lot of stuff myself, but that does become just a small part of a much bigger picture. I think, and about this question of like being a humanist, and I'm actually 100% with Stephanie. I love the term artist because it gives me a lot of stepping off points. That's totally there. That I feel really comfortable with that term. Humanist, I think I might have identified with that maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but recently I've really been feeling like decentering humanness is important for having a more
Can you
complete
define that?
perspective.
I have no idea what you're talking about. What is that?
So when I say decentering humanness, I'm thinking about like kind of along the lines you were just saying, Stephanie, of like including the natural world, but maybe instead of just being like humans and the natural world, having like a more complete overarching perspective that sees us as a smaller part of something bigger instead of just like adjacent to the rest of it. So when I think about humanness, I'm also thinking about, humpback whale-ness, and I'm thinking about the air, I'm thinking about the water, and I'm thinking about the soil, and all of these things as being on this kind of equal playing field, but also kind of constrained as part of this complex web of relationships, instead of just being like, okay, we've got humans, we're going to be humanists, and then we've also got the rest of the world, or the rest of the world around us. It's kind of like we're going to take the humans out of the center and sort of recognize all of the web of connections that we're all bound up in. That's been really generative, like helpful direction for me to think over the last few years. So I don't know that I'd identify as a humanist anymore. Maybe there's some other term that is going to be more helpful there.
Well, I like what you said. I think that's, go ahead, Stephanie.
I was just going to say we should work on that term, because I think that conversation is coming more and more, and it's an important one. And I've been talking about it in terms of being anti-human supremacist.
Yeah.
But that's not right. It's like, how do we wrap that up from the other direction? Yeah, right. It's like anti-human supremacist.
Yeah, I mean,
but
this is fascinating. That is the sort of the binary vision that human beings, or at least culturally, particularly in the West, that we think about things, right? It's man versus nature, and it's like, well, we kind of all need each other, right? But having said that, we don't have that much more time. But I do want to get to this question about these experiences that you've been having. I mean, we've talked a little bit about how you were before, each of you, or more, Kyle, you talked about it, but and how you are now. And so how has, Stephanie, you talked about how it took several years to get this secret garden. How has that experience with creating and manifesting and collaborating with these pieces of art, how has that informed your creative practice, or has it?
Definitely has. Everything for me is a question, and every new piece is an evolution. Just like Kyle was talking about, it's like something comes up over the few years. It's like, I've been thinking of myself in relation to things that I make as maker sister, as opposed to like this master narrative that I've heard in the past that's been embedded into the system. And that's really as a result of working with the technology, thinking about it in artful ways, and trying to put those two things together and come up with a solution that feels more viable going forward. And so for me, every iteration, I'm sure the VR piece of Secret Garden is going to change something in the way that I think about it, right? In the way that we move that forward. And so for me, this whole practice is about a kind of interaction with the world of philosophy around the world. And then trying to make my philosophy somewhat visible, or at least allow others to experience it in some way, shape, or form. And that's the fun for me. So it's always about changing and thinking and pushing forward.
Kyle?
Yeah, I think kind of building on that note about these webs of connections and influences in technology, especially in digital technology, it's really hard to pretend that you are the sort of master maker because you're constantly aware of all of the other tools that you're building on and all of the people that are working on those tools. The open source movement was really formative for me in terms of thinking about my artistic practice and how I contribute the product of my work back to other artists. And within open source, you're constantly seeing like, okay, these 20 people worked on this, small library that I'm using in my project. And then all of those people were influenced by these other people who worked on these pieces of code. And when you see yourself as part of that web, it becomes really difficult to imagine like, oh yeah, I'm the greatest person who can finally put all this together correctly. No, you're like just the last small bit in a long line of influences and collaborations. So yeah, I can really relate to that.
I love that. As a creator myself, I love the way that you both described it, because I think fundamentally for me, I even think less about the technology now than I ever have. I know there's more of it, but at the end of the day, it's about people, right? I mean, I'm a human, you're human, your audiences are human. We can only have a human experience, right? I'm never going to be a humpback whale, at least not in this lifetime. At least I'm not aware of that possibility happening. But the idea is, what are we thinking? How are we thinking about things? And then what are we using to engage with those thoughts, right? Like, how do we create that experience in a way? And that's what's exciting to me about immersive technology, right? Is that you can create these worlds that people increasingly can engage with their five senses, right? We think about smell and touch and hearing and so on, right? And taste. And so I think that's particularly exciting. And moving forward, this is our last question. Kay said, talking about science and tech lighting the way forward. When you hear that sentence, I thought it was very poetic. What comes to mind for you as an artist, as accomplished artists? I mean, both of you are incredibly accomplished artists. What do you think of that sentence?
Yeah, science and tech lighting the way forward. I'm I don't know if I agree with it. I think it's probably like local community organizing that will light the way forward. Mutual aid, small systems of support, networks of support. I think science and tech, it's complicated,
Or how relative to artists? Okay.
Yeah.
Because we're talking about artists. I guess I should put it in
Sure.
that context. Like, how does art, science, and tech, how do we potentially light the way forward there? I think, if I may speak for you, Kay, I think we're really talking about it in the context of why we're all here, right? Which is about art.
I think it's important to be using the tools that are kind of vernacular for the culture that you're operating in as an artist. And that is, you know, we've all got our mobile phones in our pockets. We're all on Zoom constantly every day. This is inseparable from our way of life. That doesn't mean that it's going to be the thing that saves us or lights the way forward, but it does mean that as artists, we have to confront it and be kind of use it appropriately in our work. So I agree with that. But I'm not sure that it's going to be the thing that guides us as artists in any way. It's going to be inseparable from any kind of movement that we can build, any kind of power that we can build.
Yeah, Kyle, that's amazing, right? So I think of that too. So the statement itself scares me, right? If I think about science and tech leading the way, I'm like, oh, okay. So what work does that mean we have to do as artists and people, community members, and people who are thinking broadly and deeply to kind of think about how community organizing gets supported by that, how we as just individuals get supported as opposed to acted upon by it, because I think there's a tendency to be acted upon versus to be a contributor, to be something that is cared for with. And so for me, it's about, well, then how do we as artists try to help lead, right? Like right now, there's this moment of people looking to us in a way like, okay, well, what can we do? How can we see this? What are the stories
Hasn't that
about this
always been the
technology?
case, though? Haven't artists
I think so.
often taken humanity beyond the prescribed limits of what we're imagining for today? Hasn't that always been the case?
I think it has. I think the value of it shifts, right? Like sometimes it's valued, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it's heard, sometimes it isn't. Um, and depending on context, like where you are, right, as well, I think that changes things. So I think it is. It's about who's listening, if they're listening at all, and who we bring along, right? Because I think about all the folks around us and just like, okay, like I don't feel like anything special as an artist. I just happen to have a platform that allows me to do stuff, and so I want to bring my community with me, and let them kind of guide whatever it is, and maybe use some of that open source to do something different, or at least to model something different, because that's one of those things I'm always trying to do. It's like I get told all the time, oh, that's not really possible. And the question becomes a 2-year-old, why not? And look, we did this kind of crazy thing, so why can't you? I don't know.
Yeah, never tell Stephanie Dinkins that can't happen, because I'm not going to agree with you. But I like the way that, let's close on this. I like what you both said about who we bring along, right? And how do we engage? And how are we holding ourselves and our teams accountable for the work that we are doing? It's my great honor, Kyle McDonald, Stephanie Dinkins. You are truly brilliant creators, and I'm grateful to know both of you. And I want to remind folks that you can still see their works. Stephanie is her work, some of her work will be at the Smithsonian Institute in an installation from mid-November through the summer. And Kyle McDonald, his Siren, that's Secret Garden for Stephanie, and Kyle McDonald's Siren installation will be moving on to the Massachusetts Contemporary Museum of Art. So congratulations to both of you for your extraordinary work. And thanks for this conversation. And I hope we have many more in the future.
Me too.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you for
Adora.
your great moderation. We appreciate it.
Yeah, wonderful as always.